we offer blessings for one another. Blessings and gratitude for this time together, even for our time huddled outside in the chilly air, waiting for the fire alarms to cease. Even these times are a blessing, because it's so wonderful to see in those moments our care for one another, how we huddle together, how we make sure that everyone is out safe, how we give somebody a coat, how we give somebody a hand. It is a blessing. Our community is full of such blessings. We but have to look to see them and lift them up. It is through such blessings, such small moments, that we know that we are here for each other, that we affirm our humanity and our individual and collective importance. It is in those moments that we are sure that the divine rests in each of us. May we continue always in gratitude. May our hearts be open always to love. May it be so.
Thank you, Reverend Natalie. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to everyone online for waiting for us as we braved our way through a fire alarm. On behalf of the Veatch Board of Governors, welcome to Veatch Sunday and the Veatch Program's annual meeting. My name is Diane Cohen, and I am the chair of the Veatch Board of Governors. For those who were with us for worship earlier today, you had the opportunity to hear from our grantee partner and guest, Deborah Scott, founder and CEO of Georgia Stand Up. Deborah, thank you for your words. Your sermon was inspiring. And the work you do is so meaningful to us all. I'd like to extend a warm welcome now to Rosemary Rivera, Executive Director of the Public Policy and Education Fund of New York, who is joining us for a dialogue with Deborah Scott about all that connects us towards sustaining democracy. As you know, Veatch is the national philanthropic giving program of our congregation. We have been a leader in progressive philanthropy since 1959, and Veatch currently funds nearly 200 organizations across the country and right here on Long Island who are putting our UU values into action every day. As this is the Veatch annual meeting, I'd like to invite you to review our annual report to see a full list of the grants that the Veatch program awarded in fiscal year 2023. This is available on the UUCSR website under the Veatch blog. I encourage you to visit the blog often to read regular updates about the work of Veatch and our grantees. We are also proud of the Veatch program and of the congregation's steadfast support of funding justice for 65 years. This is an extraordinary legacy that every member of this congregation is a part of. I know we are all looking forward to hearing from Deborah Scott and Rosemary Rivera, and I will now turn it over to the Veatch Executive Director, Joan Maneri, who will open our program for us today.
Great, thank you, Diane. Hi, everybody. So it's wonderful to see you all here today, and welcome to those who are joining us online via the live stream. And it's such an honor to welcome our longtime grantee partners, Deborah Scott and Rosemary Rivera. So this is my 7th Veatch Sunday, and some of you know I come to this work with Veatch and with the congregation after many years of working directly in the field as an organizer, as an educator, as a writer, and as a trainer of young organizers. And I'm always proud to say that I am a 2-time former Veatch grantee. I deeply appreciate what it really takes for Veatch grantees to put UU faith into action, especially over the long haul. So from that perspective, as we begin today's program, I just wanted to share that there is very much a sense out there, we heard about this morning from Deborah, among all of our grantees, that the threats and the stakes, especially during this time, are about as high as they've ever been, and that this is really a time of transformation. Everything we do right now really matters. Many of us are feeling that, but Veatch grantees who are disproportionately impacted by racism, by economic inequity, by climate change, by gender-based discrimination, they are feeling it on every level. So today we get to hear examples of what they're doing to fight back and to build the more just and joyful world that we know through our values to be possible. In a moment, Domenico Romero from our staff will introduce himself, and we're going to co-moderate this discussion with Deborah and Rosemary. And we've shared their bios with you on paper, they're on the tables, but I'm just going to take a moment to more formally introduce them. Deborah Scott is the founder and chief executive officer of Join to Stand Up. She is an Obama White House champion of change and is nationally known for her work in civic engagement, voting rights, and community empowerment. She is an organizer, a strategist, a mentor to young activists, and has been on the front lines of racial justice and progressive social transformation for more than 25 years. She's a graduate of Clark Atlanta University and a recipient of numerous awards. Deborah is a member of the Power, Innovation, and Leadership cohort at the Harvard Kennedy School. Rosemary Rivera is the executive director of the Public Policy and Education Fund of New York. Rosemary has more than 2 decades of experience in community organizing, training, advocacy, and leadership. Rosemary served as the New York statewide organizing director at SEIU 1199 from 2010 to 2019, where she led efforts to bring billions in new funding for public schools. She is the vice president of People's Action, the state chair of the Alliance for Quality Education, and she sits on the North Star Fund's board of directors. So we are so lucky to have this conversation today. Domenico?
Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. I'm really thankful for being here today. And thank you to our guests, panelists. My name is Domenico Romero. I'm the Senior Program Officer at the Veatch program. I didn't plan to say this, but I'm actually a 4-time Veatch grantee in my time in organizing. One of those in Mexico, actually. When I won't say more about that right now. But I share both the pride of the importance of the Veatch program and the responsibility of holding the values that you all have in relationship to supporting the great work that you all and other organizations do. So thank you for being here with us. We're really excited about this conversation. And can we start a little bit with you all telling us a little bit about yourselves, about how you came to this work, and about the organizations that you all belong to right now? And we can start with Rosemary.
Good afternoon, everyone. After that delicious meal, I hope you'll stay awake, But thank you so much for your long-time support. Let me just say that off the bat. A little bit about myself. So you all know my title, but I will be honest with you. I think all of us, when we think about who we are, it's the accumulation of all of the things that have happened in our lives who shape who we are and how we think about the world. And as organizers at the Public Policy and Education Fund, I think our organizers are trained to kind of peel that onion back about how you got to the place of thinking about the world that we live in. I think there's no more important work than actually thinking about how to make sense of the world, especially in today's day, right? Like, the world doesn't necessarily make that much sense to us at this moment. And so I think that's part of the work of the Public Policy and Education Fund, is building relationships and trust. And that comes through the storytelling of, like, getting to know one another, and through that relationship building and trust building. So I'll tell you my story very briefly. I was born and raised in New York City. I was born and raised as, I don't know if that's the right word. I was left in the hospital, and so New York State is my mother and father. And so, like any good rebellious child, I fight them every day now. So, that's that's part of it. Like, Mom, Dad, you did a crappy job. Like, like any child who is left on the streets of New York City, I went through a lot. I only went to the 6th grade. And eventually, much later, I got my GED in prison. And so I've been in prison, I've been homeless, and I stumbled into this organization of the Public Policy and Education Fund, honestly, when I came home, and they were making us do community service, and I just didn't want to wash anybody's pots anymore. And I was like, isn't there something meaningful that I can do? And I got connected to one of these organizations. And the welcoming environment of the people in that organization who wanted me there, who opened up the space to me, was very different from my experience in my life. And so I came in, you talked a lot about love. I came in really angry. I was angry. I didn't understand oppression and why my life had happened and and I learned. I was ready to be taught. And so you at Veatch have a responsibility for the trajectory of my life, because we had Veatch then when I came in, and through those programs, here I am today. So I am part of your success stories, how would I say. So, yeah. So that's who I am. And I just want to say, it is difficult. It is still difficult to always lead with love. I'm angry still. I'm still angry. I think all of us get angry. But I learned that it is not sustainable to constantly be angry, and it doesn't lead us to success. So doing so in a way that is based in love and in our values, I think is incredibly important. So thank you to all of you who do this work, because whether you know someone like me or not, that's the impact that you're having on people's lives. These organizations change policy to create concrete changes in people's lives, and no one will ever come up to you, Deborah, and say, thank you for doing that. But it also transforms people's lives, and I think I'm an example of that. That's all.
Wow. So, do you want me to answer that? Okay. So I am, as I talked about earlier, I was born in Boston. So my life has been a twist from going from Boston. I think I lived in New York a little bit, but I also lived in Ohio. And then I moved south. So because I had seen other places and had been in other situations, it allowed me to recognize inequity in a different way. And so one example of that, I was in a program in Boston called the Metco system, and this is in the 70s, 72, 4, and they were trying to desegregate the schools, right? Or segregate the schools. I don't know what they were trying to do at the time. But there was a voluntary program where some of us were selected into a program so that you could get bused into better schools, so that you didn't have to go to the public school in inner city Boston. And so I was in that program, and we had to get up in the morning and caught the bus at 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:35 in the morning, so that the bus can get back to take the inner city schools, kids to school. But on the way, we would fight each other because we were from all different neighborhoods. And, it was Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. And so it was only like 13 of us. And so, whose neighborhood is better? So if you can imagine all of a sudden seeing people lined up to throw things at the bus. And we didn't understand what was going on. We didn't know, well, what's going on? We were sitting out the window and they start throwing things. What's going on? And then we get to the school and they're lined up, and the kids and the parents, and this is a school that wanted us, right? I guess they got something to have these kids in the school. So to have people line up and touch you because they had never touched black skin, right? And touch your hair or treat my friend differently because she didn't look like me and all of that. On the way to school, I saw grass in a different way. Grass is in the front lawn, right? Everybody have grass in the front lawn if you have grass? Well, in my neighborhood, grass was not in the front lawn. Sometimes it's in the park and it's in the backyard, sometimes if you had one, but we didn't have grass in the front lawn. So as I would be in the bus, I would be fascinated by the front lawns. Right? And not knowing that would impact me later on. So transportation has been a part of my life from the beginning, and equity has been a part of my life from the beginning. So when I started working on campaigns that talked about equity, the thing that stuck in my mind is, well, why didn't we have grass? Right? Why didn't our grass look like that? And that's the same thing. Why don't our schools? Why aren't our schools like the other schools? Why aren't our cafeterias like the other schools? So I could see it very clearly, even in the north. And then I went to Oberlin, Ohio, and then it looked like there was this melting pot of people that were all getting along, and everybody was mixed, and racial segregation didn't exist, and all of that. Not really. And then I went south, and it all made sense. So when you talked about up south is real, down south is real. But the values that my family, that I learned all along the way has brought me to this point that if you're in a position that you can help to make change, it's your obligation and responsibility to do so. And so when we talk to our community members about what is the problem, what are the challenges that you're working with, it usually starts with an unfair treatment of something. We can't get this in our neighborhood, but we're paying the same amount of taxes. Why is that? And we set up a conversation so that everything that we're doing, it's leading with what the community needs, not what we as an organization needs. And so I think that's part of what you all do with us. You have that conversation with us and say, what do you need? What are you struggling with? What are you working on? How can we help? One of the things I love when I see you at conferences, you always take me to the side and introduce me to other people because you understand that you can't do it alone, right? So we have to build this movement of love together. But it all starts from a place of, at some point I felt, did somebody think less of me because I was black? And why is that? And then the further south I got and realized, the legacy of slavery that we didn't quite learn the same way up there, and I was called a Yankee when I moved down there, and it was confusing. But the thing that still grounds me is I want everyone to have green grass. You deserve green grass, and I deserve green grass if I want it myself, right? So to me, that's the guiding star for me. How can we equalize the playing field? Where's the equity component? If I need a pair of shoes, don't just give me a pair of high heels. I might need boots. Give me what I need, not what you want or think I deserve. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Okay, there it is. Thank you for sharing your experience and how your experience connects to the organizations and the work that you do. And clearly, it's all rooted in aspects of equity and things that people need, and you all individually, our communities. But you'll do a lot of work in the democracy area. And because it's something that you consider important and critical to achieve these other things. So can you share a little bit with us, speak to the issue of democracy and why how long-term organizing has something to do with making changes in democracy? And we can keep the same order so that.
Sure. So what? I hope this is, okay, there it is. What does a multiracial, truly inclusive representative democracy mean to you? I think about ideology these days, and if I ask you what socialism means, and I ask you what socialism means, I might get two very different answers. I think with democracy, when you think of it in the simplest terms, like I'm thinking of democracy in its simplest terms, I think of like a system where everyone has a voice. And then I think about government, because where it is, like the reality is that what's government, and then what happens in government is like we're supposed to have a representative democracy. Now, do we? No. I ask you, do we, or is it a select few? When I think of Public Policy and Education Fund and its evolution and where it started from, I gotta say, like during the 1970s, I think that there was, like from the history that I've read, because I wasn't paying attention back then. But from the history that I've read, I understand that it was at a time during the 1970s when the closing of what was the greatest expansion of capitalism was happening in the country. And it was like towards the end of that. And what happened? We had corporations, and the greed of corporations was like running and had a huge investment in this country. And they had a lot of power in our democracy at that time. I would say that they still do. But what I'm saying is that the corporate interests, the corporate interests and the interest of poor and working class people didn't necessarily match. And so there was the need to fight for democracy, to make government listen to the 99% of us, right? To the rest of the communities, including those who were racially disadvantaged, right? Black, brown communities, low-income communities, race matters, I will just say that, even in democracy. And so we've done a lot on the democracy front at this time. I will say that since Citizens United, like now it's like everything is on steroids in terms of the influx of the money into our electoral systems, et cetera. But we've done a lot, and I'll tell you why it's important. We started a campaign, I would say it was over 20-something years ago, on fair elections in New York. It is this year that Governor Hochul is putting $114 million into the program that is supposed to start this year with a 12-to-1 matching fund system in New York State. Now, we fought that for a very long time. And those who are in power, we had to figure out how to leverage the voices of the people to those that are in power, because those in power didn't want the program, because the system actually worked for them the exact same way that it was, because they were in positions of power. But what did that mean to communities of color when I'm knocking on the door and they're like, well, there's nobody that looks like me that's represented. When I walked into this church, the Reverend said, the first thing she said is like, we welcome diversity. But how much diversity really was in upstate New York, and in many of the parts, it was non-existent. In many ways. Now, we've gotten much better at it, but that's not to say we still don't have a long way to go before we sleep. So we've done a lot in terms of the voting rights, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, right, like preserving democracy in New York State. And Deborah's right. It is under attack in ways that we haven't seen in a long time. And in New York State, where we are supposedly a progressive beacon for the rest of the state. I mean, think about it. Even Frank Sinatra said it, you know, like, we attract people from everywhere. They're like, well, if you want to make it there, you got to make it anywhere. I don't know how the song goes, but anyway, I'm not a singer. But that kind of, that attraction to this, what I would call a state that is like a salad of like diversity in many ways, yet you see upstate regions who are the up south. And so that diversity hasn't necessarily equated to real progress for the people in New York, because government still has not listened to the people of New York, and they don't find a way into our democracy. So we have to look at all angles. This year, what we've done is we started a BIPOC table on democracy. One of the things I found fascinating when I came in as the organizer, you know, like started volunteering here and finally opened up my eyes. When Black and brown people open up their doors, you are slapped in the face with either the police, bad schools, you know, the schools don't teach well, the healthcare system, you have no access. These are the things that slap us in the face on a day-to-day basis. But who thinks about democracy? And so Public Policy and Education Fund taught me about power and democracy, and how it actually had such an impact throughout for all of the other issues that we were fighting for. I am old enough to remember the Long Island Night. But anyway, like the blockage of policy that would have made a real difference in our lives everywhere else in New York State. And so democracy is critical, and it is absolutely under threat. Authoritarianism and the white Christian nationalist right, and I'm sorry for saying that, but I am going to say it loudly. I'll stop there.
Truth, right? So this is what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. That's one of the things that we often teach and share with our young people, because they need to know that they're a part of building a better democracy, maintaining the culture that we need in some cases that doesn't exist yet, that's only an ideal. We have a constitution that some of us weren't even meant to survive, or it wasn't meant for us. So we approached our building of our communities in a different way. We get them to understand that they actually have power, and they have power unrealized. They're not utilizing their power, and their currency is their vote. And so once they start to understand that there's a relationship between their vote and what happens in their community, that begins to marinate in them that says, oh, well, then those elected officials work for me. Well, they should work for you, right? But do they? So getting our folks to understand that when you cast your vote, it's a process. Getting them to understand the process is broken. When you're in a state like Georgia, where every time we get someone registered to vote, they take 4 people off the rolls. So every time we think we have the numbers in the progressive category, they'll do something crazy like, just change the law, or change your voting place, or say that, you need to do this versus that. So in Georgia, if you're a man and you happen to not be able to pay your child support, you lose your license. Okay, probably that might sound good. But if you lose your license, you can't go to work because you can't drive, because the transit system doesn't take you where you need to go. So you lose your license, then you get pulled over because you're driving without your license, and now you're going to jail. But guess what? You can't vote because you don't have a license, because they made it so that you have to have a voter ID. And then they don't tell you how you get a voter ID. So part of what we do is unpack democracy in micro levels so that people understand that it's their responsibility to get their power. That someone is trying to take this power away from you, and you have to fight for it. You have to do whatever you have to do to make sure you get it. And it usually starts with just educating yourself. So when we're on the phones, we have 50 to 70-year-old black women on the phone calling other black women, right? And so in Georgia, you don't have to worry about whether black women over 50 are going to vote. 90% of them are going to vote. But what we call them for is ask them, can you get your grandkids to vote? Do you think it looks like you have 5 other people in your family that could register. Can you talk to them about it? And then we have to talk to them in a different way. They're on TikTok and social media in a way, in bite-sized chunks. We can only give them a little bit of information, and we have to make it cool. So that means we have to have young people to talk to them, because they don't want to listen to a mom. They want to listen to their peers. But their peers have to understand. So when we're saying we have canvassers, we're shifting and saying we have many organizers, because if those who are knocking on the doors don't understand that their vote matters either, they're not going to have a good conversation at that door. They're just doing it just to get the job. What we're trying to tell them is you have to go beyond that. You have to understand that that power is in you and in your family, and if you get you registered and you registered and you registered, that you actually can get something in your family and for your community. But every single day in Georgia, you can just open the paper. We're at the front page of every paper these days. Bad stuff is happening, and it's in their face. So whether the police are killing people in our streets, or whether they're taking out voting machines in broad daylight, and whether they're election deniers, whether all of the things happen in a place like Georgia. But as I said earlier, it's the love is the love language that we use is resistance. We're not going to accept that. We're not going to be defeated. We're not going to even get depressed about it, right? You can get angry, but turn that anger into fuel for change. Because, what I would say is this is our moment, right? Every generation has a moment. Where did you stand? What did you do when, right? When 9/11 happened, we all know where we were. Right? So where were you in this moment is what we ask our people to look at. So as you all have supported us, Veatch has been so instrumental to the organization, but personally to me, but I would say that I don't even know if you know that you're the trendsetter. The other foundations are now looking at the Veatch model. It's taken about 10, 15 years. They were just given one and done. One grant for 1 year, maybe you get 2, maybe you get 3. So I think I have you beat. You said you were a 4-time grantee. You were 7 times 4. Who was 7? 2, 4. I think I got you beat. I've been in the game since 2007 is when you gave us our first grant. Because you saw that we believed, that you believed us, and I'm saying you as the proverbial, the organization, the individuals who were in place, and at the time was Victor Cantana, Victor, and then Marjana, and then now you, Domenico. It has been so refreshing to have a relationship with a foundation that not just sees our organization, but sees me and sees the struggle that we go through, because it's not hard to organize anywhere, but it's definitely not, it's hard to organize in the South. And then to be a woman, and black men, white men love black women in Georgia, right? They love the leadership of black women in Georgia, right? So the very people that are considered the bottom of the totem pole are the ones that are leading in Georgia in terms of getting the vote out, that are the ones knocking on the doors, calling the folks. They're the ones that they say that black women saved democracy in Georgia, or say if Georgia saved the South, then the rest of us are to follow. But we're in this moment of crisis because it's about to happen again if we don't do something, right? So when good people come together, I think we can make it happen. This is a part of the coalition of the willing. for those of us that are conscious enough to see what's going on, and we know it's about fear, right? We know I don't think some of these folks even believe what they're saying, but they're fearful, and I get it. But the good thing about people of color is we just want equity. We just want green grass. We're not coming for you like that. we just want a piece of the pie. And I believe that we can have the beloved community and we can all eat at the table, that we don't have to fight over a crumb of pie. And I think this organization sets that example for the rest of us.
Before you go with your question, I forgot at the beginning to mention that if you want to ask a question to the panelists, you can write it in a little card, and Eileen, our program director, will collect them. Right there, Eileen is saying hi to everyone. Sorry. So now you
No, that's great.
I would love to add.
Oh, please, yes, I was just going to ask you. Please do, yes.
Do you mind if I
Yeah,
piggyback
I would love
on
it if
this?
you would.
I love this. Okay. So I think about the fact that in New York here, we are sitting in the richest state, in the richest country, in the history of the world. And yet, we have runaway inequality at such a high level. So that green grass, you're talking about CEOs today make 846 times what an average worker makes today. 846 times. So that means for every home I own or every car I own, they can own 846 of them. Like, it's huge. And I think one of the things that I'm really very clear on is that democracy is what's going to help us begin to reverse that runaway inequality that exists right now, because it is through government that we are going to be able to actually harness or kind of like put parameters in place to the corporate greed and interest of the few over the interest of the many. That's one thing I want to say about that. The second thing that I want to really say is about, I've got to add on about Veatch. So when I started, and I told you this story when I saw you, like when I started, Veatch was the most important grant because I was a volunteer and then an organizer, just, the front field, doing my work. We didn't know anything about this development and funder world and, how they got the money. We just were working there and talking to people and getting them all together. But the Veatch grant was the one grant that we all knew about in the entire organization. Why? Because it was the only place that gave us general operating support. Multi-year general operating support. Now think about it. We take on issues, we take on all those little tiny issues. The education system, the criminal justice system, the healthcare system. These are massive issues. People have been working on this since before I came around. I have friends who are now in their 80s who've been working on this, who have the afros, and I find their pictures of them saying healthcare for all, and we're still saying healthcare for all. Change is slow, but can you imagine if that kind of multi-year consecutive, because things change, the environment changes, the things that happen, the laws change and how we govern ourselves, the things around us, staffing changes, but not only things like that, but we have to, I think I was mentioning it, was it Corinne, one of you, I was talking to you about being adaptable, like the ability to adapt and change and shift depending on the current dynamics that you are in and what you are facing. You do it in your lives, right? You adapt and you change depending on what is going on in your life. Organizations do, no, I don't agree with Citizens United, but they do kind of have a life of their own, right? Like, they are alive through that connectivity. So Veatch has been very important. Interestingly enough, I always think about why New York? And here we are very important election year. I know this is a C3 conversation, but this is a very important election year. February 3rd, I read in your thing, is a very important election date. You have the special, right? It's in your paper, so I'm not saying anything wrong. It's in your paper. February 3rd. 13th, sorry. Sorry about that. It's a very important date here in Long Island. And yet, New York has not been seen, because it is seen as that progressive beacon, there has not been a lot in place in terms of 365 days of building independent political power through civic engagement. And if we do not build independent political power through civic engagement, we are going to be in the same shape again. We are 40th in this state in terms of voter turnout. And if Veatch had not supported the Public Policy and Education Fund in the 8 cities that we actually work in, that, when we started, we were like neighborhood to neighborhood. We thought that was going to build your state power. It doesn't. You have to build coalitions and infrastructure. You have to think about it. When I started, I didn't have a cell phone. I cut issues with a phone book. All of a sudden, you had van. And then that van, the cost of it, in order to use it, was prohibitive. So we created another organization called the New York Civic Engagement Table. Now we're standing up programs in areas like central New York. What I want to do is knock on 50,000 doors. This month alone, we knocked on 1,000 just in Binghamton alone. So I want to knock on doors, talk to people, interrupt the dominant narrative, and make sure that we really do invest in our democracy if you care about education, if you care about climate, if you care about healthcare, if you care about any of these things, then it is our responsibility now to care about democracy.
Yes.
What she said.
I just want to see if there are any questions. Eileen, are there questions from from folks? You want to come up and ask a couple? And I think we have a couple more. New York Civic Engagement Table, also a Veatch grantee.
That was our baby.
Oh, it's on. Okay. Thank you. What are some of the concrete policy changes that your organizations have made? What is the Veatch program funding on Long Island? And is your organization addressing anything on Long Island? And I would stop with that for now.
I just want to jump in and say, I'd love to hear you talk about how you work with the groups on Long Island, but we fund 8 organizations on Long Island with general support grants that are working on all kinds of issues. And if you can talk to us a little bit about how you work with them, that's great.
Yeah, so we have worked in Long Island through an affiliation. We had an affiliation with the Long Island Progressive Coalition for a long time. Our work has kind of diverged as of late. Like they've been working primarily around some environmental stuff, like locally. I was supposed to meet with Lisa Tyson last night. Her daughter got sick, so I didn't get to do that. So we're working in collaboration. We are definitely doing a C3 program around civic engagement throughout New York State that we are trying to also fund the Long Island Progressive Coalition in order to build that up. Some of the work that we've done is, recently we just won, since 2019, I think that the floodgates opened in terms of the amount of policy wins and victories that we've been able to achieve. And it was because we were able to build that long-term independent power in order to shift the dynamics. I don't want to get into, the conversation too much, but I'm pretty sure all of you remember, the Long Island 9, and then remember the IDP here in New York State, et cetera, and the length of time that it took us to move that. Since then, we were able to win. The reason I have gray hair right now is because I worked on the campaign for fiscal equity for over 20-something years in New York State in order to equitably fund children in New York State. We won it at first in 2007 when we won $7 billion for public education, and then had to win it again. And so we just finished the campaign for fiscal equity, and as you see, Long Island they're looking at Long Island and whether or not they should hold harmless because of that law. So those of you who are into education know what I'm talking about in terms of them cutting at the same time. Second is the most interesting campaign as of late that I think we've done is the Invest in Our New York campaign. And that is where we actually held to the premise of why we were formed by taxing the wealthy in New York State. So we just brought in it was originally $4 billion in additional revenue that has helped healthcare, education on a yearly basis. It is what funded the first the first in the country, the Fund for Excluded Workers, right? It is now $10 billion a year that is coming in revenue to New York State for the desperate needs of New Yorkers in a time when no other state will do that. No other state was doing that, and we did it, and we are still continuing to push to close corporate loopholes, to do all of these things. Third, one thing that was interesting, Long Island, Rochester, and Buffalo this past year, I'm just going on the ones from last year here too. Long Island, Rochester, and Buffalo were the three cities in New York State where Black and brown people in particular were sued at incredibly high levels during the time of COVID by hospitals. And so this year, we just passed we just did a campaign called End Medical Debt, which has actually achieved so that it is not on their credit report, so that Black and brown families can move forward to have a better ability for that equity so that we can see the grass someday. Although I wouldn't want grass, I'm sorry. I'd probably kill it. I'm not a green thumb, but it would be my choice, yeah. So that's one of them. The other thing that we do a lot. One of the things that is most interesting and soulful, and as someone who spent, to be honest with you, about 8 years total in prison, I can tell you two quick things about that. We did a lot in terms of bail, discovery, and speedy trial. Discovery and speedy trial look to be like the DAs are already trying to reverse that. Discovery is incredibly important and maybe more important than bail reform was in New York State. Discovery is incredibly important. And so I want people to pay attention to that. The other one is called the 13th Forward. Do you know that we still have slavery on the books, right? Because of this little insidious thing called, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in prison, I had to work in prison. It was I think it was 10 cents an hour. I think I got a raise to maybe 12 cents an hour after a few years. But we had to do these there were these industrial ovens. They're 400, 500, 800 degrees. I don't know how many, not 400. It was 1,800 degrees, come to think of it. And we used to do this industrial painting of all of the shelves and cabinets that you see in government. If you're not feeling well and you decide, you don't want to go to work that day, you have to put on these, think of the Ghostbusters with these masks on. It's very, very hot, and so you're sweating and you're doing all of this. And if you don't go, first of all, they call you your number. They don't call you by your name. So my name was not Rosemary Rivera. It was 90G0120. Hi. And so they make you go through this. And if you say no, you're in luck, or it counts against you. And so what was interesting to me about this is that I never thought that I was going to work. I thought that I was still under punishment. I was no longer a person, I was a number. I caught a sunburn in the yard, and they wrote me up and told me I was going to lock for destroying state property. So in essence, this campaign made me realize that I have been treated as a slave in my life. I'm state property. And so we want to change that, and this has been an incredibly soulful campaign. Can you imagine if in prison, psychologically it does something to you where you say, I'm not a slave, but I am a worker, just I happen to be incarcerated. If we in our communities no longer thought of it as just, but thought of it as, where did you get your experience? You were an incarcerated worker, not a throwaway person, etc. So we're working on the 13th forward in order to change that very insidious thing that says that the state can, that you're still a slave of the state. And then, of course, education. Again, you have heard what is happening in New York City. With education, you have, yes, we still have inequities. I understand, even in Long Island, you can see between Brentwood, and you can see it from, I forgot the name of it in Long Island. It starts with an R. It looks like a college campus. I went to this school. It was like it's a public school. Somebody tell me, what's the name? Thank you, Roosevelt. Sorry. That's an amazing, that's all funded by our tax dollars, and then you go see other schools where we don't even have doors in the bathrooms or anything like that. Yeah. So those are some examples of some of the campaigns that we're working on. I'm sure I can provide a list of many that we're working on. Oh, one more that is interesting. Oh, yes, ppefny.org. And some of them, because PPEF is not our forward-facing, if you're really interested, I would encourage you to go to citizenactionny.org. One interesting one that we're doing this year that has not been done is called the Milk Bill. It's mothers and infants lasting change in order to put direct money in mothers' pockets. It's almost akin to a universal basic income while mothers are going through their time period. So I will stop there because I can keep going.
I love it. Wonderful. So thank you. Thank you. We have a few more minutes, and I want to just invite you, Deborah, to talk about some of your policy wins, and then maybe between the two of us, you can kind of bring us home. And if there's other questions that are on the index cards that we didn't get to, we'll take a look at them and get back to you on them.
Good. This has been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your heart, too. So one of the things I'd like to share is, as we're looking at the benefits of democracy, there is the federal government has trillions of dollars apparently available for communities, or so they say, right? IRA, right? So what we're doing right now is organizing our government dollars. So I went to a conference a couple of weeks ago, and I heard about 7 agencies talk about all the money that this administration has for communities, all the grants that are going to be available for the cities for infrastructure, right? Infrastructure. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, how are we going to get any of this money? Because if I say Tyrone and Rochelle, do not feel that their lives have changed for the better over the last 3 years, they may not vote because they may not see anything to vote for. So you have government on one hand, federal government on one hand saying, we have all this money, look what we have, and it's encumbered for the next 10 years, and we're going to put it out there in the field. But nonprofits don't know how to apply for it. Cities don't know how to apply for it. And definitely the South doesn't know how to get the resources. So what we're doing in real time, and I know you want to talk about policy wins, and you all can read about that. I want to talk about the future, right? Because this is where we need help. Because as we say, organized people is power, but organized money is power. So in this moment, we've had to shift. So I would have never thought all these years that I would be organizing 7, 8 governmental agencies to come down to Georgia to sit with 6 or 7 cities in Clayton County, the same one that got the transit, that got the buses. Now it's time for them to get the transit. And so the projects have been slow. So we have to be forward thinking, and that's why these campaigns take so long. This was passed. We started working on this campaign in 2014. It got passed finally after maneuvering a couple of people out of office on their own, knocking on a lot of doors, and then people taxing themselves to get the bus. Now it's time to get the train. Well, the rail system is now, they're in a situation that they need this gap money. And so we're organizing government money to come into this county to help with some of the infrastructure needs, because if you get a train and a bus but have no sidewalks or have no bus shelter, that's still going to be a problem for you. So we're in a different space that we had to shift and pivot and said this moment calls for us to not just organize people, but organize our government to come to us. And then we have funders, and you're invited. Did you get the invitation? Funders are coming as well so that they can look at the gap between how to get this federal money, what kind of technical support is needed, and how this actually translates to campaigns on the ground that affect people's lives. So we're doing that on the 15th and the 16th of February. So a policy win was getting people who would pass that policy to encumber that money so that we can pull it down. Read between the lines. Okay, so we did that by knocking on a whole lot of doors, calling a whole lot of people. So we have to rinse and repeat. Now we have to hold our elected officials accountable. Now we have to hold and put accountability measures, so no matter who's in power, that money is still out there. We need to make sure it goes to the communities that it's supposed to. It's a Justice 40. It's at least 40% of these dollars are supposed to go to these communities that have been unjustly impacted, Black and brown communities. So we're working on that right now in real time. As I talked about earlier, our state doesn't necessarily want everyone to be healthy. They do not accept Medicaid expansion. We have no Medicaid. We have Medicaid, but it won't be expanded unless we put pressure on our state legislators. Why wouldn't they want everyone in their state to have health care? If you look at Georgia, 60% of the population actually lives in the metro area. That's the progressive part. That's where the world's busiest airport is. That's where we have high rises and high rises and all the good stuff. But if you just go 20 minutes outside of Atlanta, you're in Georgia. Georgia. Not Georgia on my mind, Georgia. Georgia. Right? And so the folks that run Georgia are really these state representatives, because we have 159 counties. What? Why would we have 159 counties? How many plantations did we have? Right? So the legacy of slavery is still with us right now. So, but the power base is controlled by those that don't live in the metro area. So it's not about not having it for their folks, and what we have to do is to knock on doors and talk about everyone deserves health care. Black, brown, and white. You're leaving your own people out, right? We need to talk about, you need to call your governor and make sure that you say that you want Medicaid expanded. And we know we're successful because they changed the number twice, right? And we've been working on this issue, and now it's making traction. Things like that they're practical everyday issues that are coupled with policy, right? So whether it's that or community benefit campaigns like the Beltline that we started over 20 years ago, and now it has done exactly what we said it was going to do. Although it supposedly connects these neighborhoods, it also displaced so many people, and we said that day one. Right? And so we put some measures in place so that people and communities will have opportunities to speak and to hold them accountable, but it's always a rinse and repeat. Everything that we do good, they're always working to undo it. So every time we make political progress, so every action has a reaction. Right? So we saw it in an election the very next day. We're seeing it at our legislature. We have a 40-day legislative session, and it's crazy already, and we're only in like the second week. So what we do very well is resist, but we also organize, and we also work very well with others. So we have convening power because we can bring elected officials in, we can bring government in, we can bring community in, we can bring other nonprofits, but we can bring the people. And that's the part that makes us different. Because when we roll at City Hall, we talked about the orange shirts. When we come to City Hall, they're coming, they see one shirt, then they see another, then they see another. And then by the end of it, they're looking like, oh my gosh, what does Georgia Stand Up want? Just give them what they want. So that's a form of power because they know what we can do, right? So sometimes we don't even have to talk at the mic. Sometimes it's a call. We walk in and the mayor or the city council member is calling, what is it that you want? Oh, well, we would like you to put this little legislation in right quick. And they will acquiesce sometimes, but we have to show that we have muscle, right? And the way we show we have muscle is we're organizing and we're bringing young people along. So it's not just those of us that may have a little gray hair showing, right? We have to train the next generation, and that's the hard work. That 18 to 35-year-olds, if you have any of in your life, bless you, bless you, bless you. We love them because they're the now and next and the future, but there's a generational shift. The way in which we talk about elections is not how they talk about elections, right? So we have to educate them because they're not teaching civics in school. So we have to micro-teach civics. So if they say you need a voter ID, we need to give an actual map of where you can get your voter ID, right? This is the location, and you can go Tuesday to Thursday. So our interns literally called every one of those offices in all 59 counties to find out what day you can get your free voter ID if you don't have a driver's license, what door do you go to, and do I have to stand in the driver's license line to get it? That deep, because you have to break it down. Because if people get to their polling location and they didn't see the email that went out that, oh yeah, we moved it across town, they're not going to vote. If people don't know how to vote, how to put the card in the machine, they're not going to vote. If the line is 7 hours long, voter suppression. That's what we're trying to fight. Right? So part of what we're doing, and I know we have to shift because I do have a lift in a little while, is as we organize these campaigns, we have to be nimble. We have to look at the future, and they could call it Sankofa. You look back at what you've done and look back at the past as you're planning for the future. So we have another 10-year strategy that we have to work on because we're just coming into fruition from the strategy we talked about 20 years ago. It takes a long time. So sustainable support, multi-generational, multi-year support for organizations like us is crucial. Because you know what I know? When we started the organization, when I came to the organization, it had $5,000. I was like, oh, okay, we'll have to do something about that, right? But the resources that you give our organization, at least know I can pay one person at least half time, right? That gives me the base. So when I go to another foundation, I can say, well, I have 2 positions, but I need 1 more because I can count on the general support of each. Thank you.
Thank you. you. So as we opened, Domenico and I both spoke to our long experience, but no matter how long we're in this work, I am just in awe and gratitude to both of you for your work, for representing this work across the country for us today, and I know that the congregation will join me in gratitude for you, for your work, for who you are, for who you bring, for all of the partnership over the many years. Thank you. And we have Governor Patty Paris, who's going to give closing words.
Our time together ends. In the days before we come together again, may our actions match our words. May our thoughts be filled with love, and may we truly make a difference in a troubled world.
Wow. That was truly inspiring. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your passion. You know, it was wonderful to learn about all that you're doing. So on behalf of the Veatch Board of Governors and the staff and the entire congregation, we just want you to know how much we appreciate you. So thank you. And, this officially ends the meeting.